Welcome to On Contact. Today we discuss the ramifications of the casino culture in America with the author of Addiction by Design, Natasha Schüll.
Trying to sweep people away from themselves, away from rationality, away from a position where they have clear lines of sight and can act as decision-making subjects. You see that on the floors of casinos, you see it in the mathematical algorithms, and I think you see it in political rhetoric today.
On Contact with Chris Hedges. The biggest political donors in the last election cycle were billionaires who have made their fortunes from the casino industry or speculation on Wall Street. The largest donor was Tom Steyer, a hedge fund manager. The second, Sheldon Adelson, a casino magnate. This is the new American capitalism in its most insidious form. It is not about producing products, but intangible experiences. It is about trying to make money with money. It is about escapist fantasies. In casinos, it is a world of glitter and noise, where the more money you are willing to spend, the more you are worth. The more you are pampered, given free hotel rooms and gifts, handed passes into special clubs for high-volume players with buffets. Scantily clad female hostesses hover around you to serve you complimentary drinks. You are invited, if you spend enough, to exclusive parties with supermodels and Hall of Fame athletes. The large colored chips turn cash into a species of monopoly money. It is Disneyland for adults, and it is the world that defines President Donald Trump. RT correspondent Anya Parampel looks at how gambling has become our premier form of entertainment and how it drives our economy.
With March Madness in full swing, have you contributed to the estimated 70 million brackets filled out? That's how many NCAA tournament brackets the American Gaming Association guesses were completed this year, with participants throwing on average $29 apiece into office pools. That comes out to $10.4 billion spent betting on college basketball this year alone. Now, only 4% of that money is officially recorded on the books, making the vast majority of this betting technically illegal. But the popularity of March Madness speaks to the role gambling plays as America's favorite pastime. 2015 was a record-breaking year for casinos as they raked in $38.54 billion through gaming. The states which saw the fastest growth in casino gaming were Maryland, Ohio, and Louisiana. But it might surprise you to know that while Americans spent $38 billion at casinos in 2015, they only spent a fraction of that on other forms of entertainment. $13 billion on football, $8.4 billion on baseball, $6.7 billion on music, and $5.7 billion on basketball, with hockey only getting about $3.7 billion. Suggesting Americans get more kicks from betting on sports than even attending games. 460 commercial casinos operated nationwide in 2015. There are an additional 486 tribal casinos, 350 card rooms, 55 racetrack casinos, and a whopping 15,423 gaming devices scattered across the United States. Meaning there are thousands of locations nationwide for Americans to test their luck and distract their minds.
Thank you, Anya. Natasha Schüll is Associate Professor of Media, Culture, and Communications at New York University. She is also the author of Addiction by Design, Machine Gambling in Las Vegas, a book that draws on extended research among compulsive gamblers and the designers of the slot machines they play to explore the relationship between technology design and the experience of addiction. So let's begin. I thought the book was fascinating and taught me a lot. And this is by design. They are creating compulsive or addicted gamblers. And perhaps you can begin by speaking about the technology that does this and then explaining what it does, what you call the zone in the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, the technology, if we take that word loosely, begins really with, you could say, architectural technology. Before you even get into these properties, they're already thinking about how to get you to the machines, the slot machines, which are the golden geese.
Which is why you write there is no real lobby. You go through the door and...
Right, and the lobby that's there is really shunting you into these other profit spaces. And so you can look into the design tomes of casinos and find all of these interesting, for example, carpets are not supposed to ever have right angles, because this will mean that the casino patrons stop and have to reflect and make a conscious, rational decision to turn into a gaming area. Instead, you want to curve their bodies around. And the places that they sit are often covered and enclosed, very sort of welcoming little cocoons in which they can disappear in front of these slot machines.
No windows.
No windows.
Mirrors. Low ceilings, dim lighting.
Distractions, settings,
Constant noise.
Mm-hmm. It's a sort of logic of convolution and confusion, and these are actually the words used, and what's called space elimination. It's not like modernist architecture where you have clear lines of sight and you're trying to give people perspective. You're trying to take their perspective away and move them where you want them to go. And this logic that plays out in the carpets and how far the ceilings come down is also playing out in the design of the cabinets, the screens, and the design of the math.
Well, you get lost. I mean, I was just in the Taj Mahal before it closed, and what is it, 3 football field size. But you very quickly are disoriented. You don't know where you are.
Yeah, and disorientation is a design strategy.
Why?
Very,
What's
very
the purpose?
explicitly so.
Why does that work?
Because they want to keep the patrons in this sort of zone where, and I'm quoting now from a design manual on casinos, where they remain open and permeable to emotional triggers, and where you can kind of get them to go somewhere.
And that's why there's no clocks.
Right.
You can't tell time.
Clocks are like a right angle. It brings you into time and space and locates you. They don't really want you to feel located. They want you to feel disoriented, swept along. It's very affective.
Now let's talk about the machines, which is the really heart of your book. And none of this I knew. But the machines themselves function like updated Skinner boxes. Explain all the ways these machines are designed to not only trigger moods and reactions, but finally a compulsive need to gamble.
Yeah, I mean, some people might think that your use of Skinner box is heavy-handed, but actually in the 1950s, Skinner himself used the metaphor of the slot machine to describe to people how Skinner boxes work.
So explain, because some people may not know, how they do work and how that is replicated in a slot.
Right, so Skinner boxes, and the famous examples being pigeons and rats who were put in these cages with buttons that turn different colors and levers, so it actually had the features of a slot machine, and you would get rewards, little pellets coming out of slots.
But not every time. That's
right.
What you point out in the book.
Well, it depended on what kind of reinforcement schedule or reward schedule.
I think you call it intermittent.
Well, that's the most addictive one. That's what he discovered, was that the most compelling kind of delivery structure for rewards was when you never know how much you're getting and you never know when. And that's always been the case for the slot machine. And what these high-tech digital slot machines of the contemporary world do is they take that basic formula and they intensify it and elaborate on it and really hone it down to, I don't know if I want to say a science or an art. And one way, for example, is the mathematical algorithms. It used to be back in the day, you'd put in some money and you'd either lose it all or you'd double or triple. It was very exciting, it was very volatile, and it usually didn't last too long. If you won big, you'd leave. If you lost, you'd leave. And these slots didn't even have stools in front of them. They were seen as quick diversion to sort of fleece people before they got to the main gambling areas. Totally different today.
So now most of the income comes out of slots.
Yeah, the vast majority.
The odds are far greater in favor of the house than they are in terms of the traditional.
Well, over time, because the idea with slots is, or this is the new idea, you put seats in front of them, you let people spend a huge amount of time.
And you go into the book about how these seats are very highly...
They're ergonomic.
Yeah, right,
right,
completely. So they don't cut off your circulation. You can sit there for hours, and they tilt at just the right angle. And
yeah, they're especially attentive to elderly people in the seats and not wanting to cut off their circulation. It's about time on device. Time on device is used so often as a kind of the key to profit, the holy grail, that they usually shorthand it as TOD. You know, and so it's the seats, it's the way they pixelate the screens, it's actually the acoustics, the way they will put all 400 sounds on a slot machine, all in the key of C in one case, because this is thought to be less fatiguing.
Well, isn't it that they go for red, or there are certain colors they use? I may have read that somewhere else.
I think you read that somewhere else, and some of this is just kind of folklore and mystery. I asked them why this color and not another color, and they said, we don't know why, we just tried it till it worked best. So the whole casino is a laboratory, and they don't have to have a science or a hypothesis ahead of time. They put machines out, and it very quickly rises to the surface what works best. So in that sense, it's not this sinister science where they say, how can we best addict people? They want to make the most money. They put out the machines, and the ones that make the most money, they keep.
Before we get into the zone, they can track, because they use these player cards, they, as you write in the book, have entire profiles of, they know when they like to gamble, how, you know, so that they can actually adjust or cater.
Yeah, that's a whole other register on which this manipulation is playing out, because they have in real time what scientists would call key press data, and they know, how you respond to certain game events, when you might leave, et cetera.
And when you might leave,
to
explain, because that was fascinating. When they can tell when you're about to leave, and what do they do? How do they tell, and what do they do?
They're still not allowed, although people are coming up with these very crafty patents to get around this regulation, but they're still not allowed to change the odds in the middle of a session. There is no big dial in the back, but they can dispatch a live luck ambassador over to the machine to try to convince you to play with the comp.
But how do they know? What do you call it, the pain threshold or the pain?
Well, they've got an algorithm to sense your pain points, your sweet spots.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah.
And they get it. And so you'll go off and get a free meal.
Right.
The pain threshold is overcome, and back you go.
It doesn't always work, because people want to be just left alone, and that's where we get to the zone.
Right, and that's what we're going to talk about after the break, which is also fascinating. When we return, we'll hear more from Professor Natasha Schüll, author of Addiction by Design, Machine Gambling in Las Vegas. On Contact with Chris Hedges. Welcome back to On Contact. Let's get back to our conversation with Professor Natasha Schüll, author of Addiction by Design, Machine Gambling in Las Vegas. So let's talk about the zone.
The zone is a term that I kept hearing over and over again as I went to Gamblers Anonymous meetings and spoke to gambling addicts. And this really describes a state, you could call it a state of flow, in which a sense of time, space, other people, and monetary value falls away. And you might say, a state of flow in the zone, this sounds very different from the thrill and suspense of gambling, which is such a volatile activity. But actually, what the casino is hit upon is that you actually make more money when you design a flow state into these machines where people don't even know that they're losing, and they sit there. Again, it's the time on device. So if you look at a lot of contemporary slot machines, they're not really operating on a logic of volatility at all. One designer of the mathematics and the algorithms of these games told me, we want to design a mathematical algorithm that makes you feel like you're reclining on a comfortable couch. So again, just like the curves in the architecture and the softly pixelated lights, they want you to sort of sit back and go with the flow.
Well, you write in the book that, in fact, winning disrupts that state.
I just couldn't make sense of that for the longest time in my research. Gamblers would say, it's so weird, but sometimes when I win a big jackpot, I feel angry and frustrated. This is because in the course of play, what they're playing for, what they've come to play for, is not winning, but staying in the zone. And winning interrupts that, because suddenly the machine is it's frozen, right? It's not letting you keep going, and it's playing music, etc. And what are you going to do with that winning anyway? You're going to just feed it back in the machine so you can extend your time on device.
What does this say about the society? Because this would be an experience that is different from people who were going to Las Vegas in the 1950s.
Right. So this is more about mood modulation, affect modulation, you could say, using technology to dampen anxieties and really exit the world. And we don't just see it in Las Vegas. You could say that we see it on the subway every morning, and the rise of all of these screen-based technologies and little games that we become so absorbed in. And what gamblers articulate is a desire to really lose a sense of self. So they lose time, space, money value, and a sense of being in the world. And you might then ask, so what is that about? You know, what does that say? How do we diagnose that? I see it really as the flip side to the pressure, the incredible pressure, which is experienced as a burden to self-manage, to make choices, to always be maximizing, living life in this entrepreneurial mode. You know, we talk about this as the sort of subjective side of the neoliberal agenda, right? Where pressure is put on individuals to regulate themselves. So in this case, they are regulating themselves, but they're regulating themselves away from that. It really is a mode of escape. This is not action gambling, this is escape gambling. And you can see it on their faces,
and
right?
And the consequences of this. I mean, the consequences are ruinous.
Right, the consequences and then the ethics are also distasteful, because in that sense you can see it as a predatory, it's a form of predation on a kind of escape that people are driven, you know, to really exit the world. They're not trying to win. The casinos are trying to win. They want to make revenue. They want to maximize their profits. And they're in a kind of partnership with the gamblers, but it's a very asymmetric partnership, because the gamblers don't want to win. They want to just keep going.
And this is the world that our president comes out of.
Yeah, and you could say that, you know, some people have likened gamblers to factory workers who are sort of alienated by the machine. I don't see it that way. This is much more about machines designed to synchronize with what you want, in this case, escape, and then profit from that. And people have called it a mode of ludocapitalism. And I think in a way you could connect that to the kind of ludopolitics that we see.
What do you mean by ludocapitalism, ludopolitics?
Well, pleasure that you, or what you want. What you want is to escape, to get into a flow, to be sort of taken away from yourself. It's very affective. And I think this is what we see in the political domain a lot, and even in the kinds of rallies and the surging of feelings and the absorption and the distraction, right? I mean, if you look at the way a casino is designed, and remember that Trump is the designer of many casinos, including his non-casino properties, they follow these same design logics of sort of disorientation, right? Disorientation and trying to sweep people away from themselves, away from rationality, away from a position where they have clear lines of sight and can act as decision-making subjects. You see that on the floors of casinos. You see it in the mathematical algorithms, and I think you see it in political rhetoric today.
And the people you write about in your book are often people without disposable income. I mean, they...
Right. And the reason that they are feeling so burdened by this pressure to maximize and make the right choices is because they simply don't have the resources or the knowledge to do that. I mean, they're living in rather precarious circumstances. They are experiencing volatility, or a sense of it, all around themselves. And so what they're seeking in gambling, ironically, is an escape from volatility. They want to recline on that couch. They want to become absorbed and swept away and not have to make choices.
And I think the other analogy we could draw from your book is that this attempt to rebuild an economy through gambling, whether that's through hedge funds or whether that's through casino magnates like Sheldon Adelson, is built on sand. And perhaps you can address that kind of broader issue.
Well, some critics of the industry have actually called out its members as themselves acting, you know, if you look in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychological Disorders, and you look under addiction, those features of what makes an addict describes pretty well how state governments and gambling equipment manufacturers behave. They're seeking a quick fix.
And they're seeking to fill their revenue holes by building casinos.
Right, and they're ignoring consequences. They're in this sort of selfish loop of a quick fix to gain more revenue. It's a kind of runaway train, addictive kind of process that they are caught in. And if you look at actually what's happening in the market, it's no longer just Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and a few casinos. We've got market saturation.
It's like 40 states now or something, right?
Well, I think in almost every state everyone can get to a casino in about half an hour. And really it's the slot machines that are bringing in the money. And more states are looking to them as a way to not raise taxes, right, and get this other. I think it's quite clearly a tax on the poor. And very ethically problematic. And I think part of the problem is that all of these governments are caught up, who are profiting on the taxes from this, right? They don't know what else to do. They are addicted to it. They are addicted to this revenue, and it's an incredibly short-sighted perspective. It is built on sand.
So when you saturate the market, this, by the way, as I mentioned before, is what happened in Yugoslavia. The economy tanked. They started building casinos that worked fine as long as there were a few. What happens when you saturate the market?
Well, when you saturate the market, you've got more and more gamblers. You have to come up with new ways of keeping them in their seats. And then you've got to make machines on this time, more and more on this time on device kind of model that's shaving off of people sitting there longer, right? You can't just fleece people. You know, in the early days of online websites, you could just throw up a website. You were assured of having an audience and customers. Now, not so much. You've got saturation there as well, and you see that in casinos, and that's reflected in the design of the machine. It's really all about how to keep people coming back as lifelong customers.
Well, the other promise they make is that when you build casinos, it brings in good jobs, stable jobs. But when you saturate the market, as we've seen in Atlantic City, where revenues have been cut in half since its heyday, from about $5 billion to $2.5 billion, that all of these jobs, unionized jobs, are gone. People are essentially low-wage workers again, temporary workers without benefits, that all of the promises that are initially made within a relatively short period of time go up in smoke.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really awkward for me to testify in front of different legislatures on the sort of anti-casino slot revenue, but in the room with me are always unions that come out in full force because they want these jobs, and I think they are being sold something that they're not going to ultimately
get. Well, they're being broken in Atlantic City. We've seen thousands of unionized workers, including at the Trump Taj Mahal, tossed out into the street. And they close the casino long enough so that when they reopen and rehire, they're hiring non-unionized workers.
Right. So I think this also reflects more generally in the coming administration.
Well, what are the consequences for us as a country, economically, in terms of, you know, this saturation of gambling as a kind of pastime? I mean, in your book, you're talking about how these slot machines are in, convenience stores and airports, and I mean, they're everywhere. They're ubiquitous.
It's also not just, I mean, it's, for me, the slot machine case is really a case study of something far broader. And you can see it most proximately, you could say, in Facebook and all of these kind of freemium games that you play on your devices. I think we make too much of the money aspect of gambling. We put it in this separate kind of box. I think the time is very important, and I think it's part of this more general sucking of our time, sucking of our attention and our energy, and this kind of distraction economy that takes us away from the actual reality that is unfolding and really needing to be addressed. So in that sense, the consequence is depoliticization.
Right. Well, they've done a damn good job. And look at the result. Thank you very much. That was Professor Natasha Schüll, author of Addiction by Design, Machine Gambling in Las Vegas. Over the last 2 years, 92% of corporate profits in America have been spent on refusing to carry out long-term investment, buying back stock, firing workers, or has been paid out as dividends to raise the price of stock. The failure to carry out capital formation, such as building new factories and hiring more workers, is economic suicide. It creates a system where wealth is not generated, but redistributed, largely through gaming the stock market or stripping companies for assets until they collapse. This is how Donald Trump and most of the billionaires around him made their fortunes. We roll the dice, they are the house. American oligarchs, the top 1% of whom now have as much wealth as the bottom 40% of the country, are cannibalizing America, looting and stealing as much as they can before the edifice disintegrates. The question is not if a crash will come, but when. And the damage these speculators and gamblers have done to our system of casino capitalism may be irreversible. Thank you for watching. You can find us on rt.com/oncontact.